What's up, gamers? It's Miss Sorensen, your crazy math teacher, back at you with video 3, memorizing the unit circle and using the unit circle. Let's get started right away. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to put on our unit circle the radians. All right, we're not going to deal too much with degrees and unit circles, so let's move forward with radians. First thing I'm going to put is this is 0, and this is also the full circle of 2 pi. Next, we've got that this is our pi over 2. Here we've got our pi, and here we've got our 3 pi over 2. I would simply memorize those. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the reference angles. And what I mean by that is when I'm looking at this reference angle, it's going to be over 6, which is essentially 30 degrees. Here we're going to be over 4. Here we're going to be over 3. And we're going to do that for the rest. So for example, this reference angle right here, and this reference angle right here, and right here are going to be exactly the same because they're all pi over 6 away from the x-axis or 30 degrees away from the x-axis. So let's go ahead and put over 6, over 6, and over 6. Fantastic. All right, so now let's go ahead and let's deal with the reference angle of 45 degrees or pi over 4. So that's going to be this one, the middle one here, and the middle one here. So go ahead and put that as over 4 for all of those. All right. Next up, we are going to put our 60-degree reference angle, or our over 3 reference angle, right here. So that's going to be an over 3, over 3, over 3. All right. The last thing we have to do for our radians is this little trick that I think y'all know pretty well by now. For this one, we're going to put a pi here, a pi here, a pi here, and then we say to ourselves, this is kind of miserable. I hate this. I feel negative. Negative meaning let's subtract 1. So what I do is I look at the denominator here, and I'm saying I feel negative. All right, what I mean is subtract 1 from the denominator. So here, we're going to have a 2 pi over 3 because that's 1 less than our 3. Here, we're going to have a 3 pi over 4, and here we're going to have a 5 pi over 6. We're subtracting 1 from the denominator. And then you say to yourselves, you know what? This isn't half bad. I'm going to add 1. I'm positive. I'm feeling good. So I'm going to add 1 to the denominator, and I get a 7 pi over 6, a 5 pi over 4, and then a 4 pi over 3. And I say, I deserve to celebrate because I'm almost done. So I go ahead, I give myself a high five, and I go to 711. There we go, folks. We've got all of our radians done for our unit circle. Next up, of course, is to do our coordinates. So for our coordinates, I like to do the axes first. So for example, this is the coordinate 1, 0. This one here is the coordinate 0, 1. Here we've got -1, 0. And then here we've got 0, -1. Sweet. All right, next thing we do, and this sounds crazy, but we're going to write all the rest of the coordinates, which happen to be divide by 2. Make sure you leave yourself a little space because we're going to add the negatives at the end. What I mean by that is maybe a little bit of space here, divide by 2, comma, a little bit of space, divide by 2. Let's do that for every single thing here. You can pause your video if you'd like and get that done. All right, I'm back at you. It does take a little bit of time, but it's not terrible. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go straight down. So I want you to draw your attention to quadrant 1 here. So for quadrant 1, I'm going to go straight down with a 1, 2, and a 3. So what I mean by that is I'm going to have a 1 here, a 2 here, and a 3. And then same thing here, but I'm going to go in the different direction, a 3, a 2, and a 1. And now I need to add square roots to everything. And I technically could add a square root to the 1, but square root of 1 is 1. So we're going to just leave that be. I'm going to add the square root here, square root here, square root here, and square root here. Sweet. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to copy all the reference angles that are the same. So what I mean by that is here, all the over 6's should be exactly the same coordinate. We'll deal with negatives later. So here, okay, where's my other one? Right here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write the same exact coordinate. So this one's going to be root 3 over 2. And this one's going to be 1/2. Same thing here, root 3 over 2 and 1/2. Same thing here, root 3 over 2 and 1/2. All right, next up, I grab my laser here. All the over 4's are going to be root 2 over 2 divided by root 2 over 2. All right, so let's go ahead and fill that in. Root 2, oopsie, wrong one. Root 2, root 2. Remember, these have to be for your over 4's. Notice how we're over 4 there. All right, so this is going to be root 2 over 2, root 2 over 2. Okay. And our last ones is we have to deal with our over 3's. So let me grab my laser again. I'm talking about all the over 3's are going to be this exact same coordinate right here. All right, so this is going to be a 1/2. Oops, I want blue, excuse me. That would have been a disaster. So a 1/2 here, a root 3 over 2. Okay, and then over here, we're going to have a 1/2, a root 3 over 2, a 1/2, and a root 3 over 2. Super. Now we have to deal with positives and negatives. Well, looking at an actual coordinate plane, to go over into the first quadrant here, we would have to have a right and then an up. So that would be a positive, comma, positive. In the second quadrant, however, we go left and then up. So that would be a negative, comma, positive. The third quadrant is a left and down. So that's negative, comma, negative. Finally, our quadrant 4 is a right and then down. So that's going to be positive, comma, negative. So now I have to go back and put my negatives. Honestly, in my first quadrant, I've got a positive, positive, so I'm good to go there. However, in my second quadrant, notice how I have to make my first coordinate negative. So I'm just going to go back in here and go negative, negative, negative. Now for my third quadrant, I'm negative for both coordinates. So I have to go back and say negative, 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 negative. Crowd goes wild. All right, and then our last quadrant, quadrant 4, our second quadrant is going to, my second coordinate is going to be negative. So I'm going to put a negative here, and a negative here. Congratulations, you are done. All right, let's move on. Let's go ahead and use this unit circle to calculate radians without using our calculator. So my first questions here are going to be, what is the sine of 7 pi? Oops. Look, it's a 7 with a cool hat on it. A sine of 7 pi over 6. What is a tangent of pi over 4? What's a cosine of 0? And how about a tangent of 3 pi over 2? How about a cosine of 3 pi over 4? How about a sine of 3 pi over 2? I'd say if you're feeling okay about this, go ahead and pause the video and then check your answers with mine. If you're not, I just want to remind you, as I kind of did already, that the first coordinate is going to be cosine and the second coordinate is going to be sine. We remember that from our review video. So if I'm going to find the sine of 7 pi over 6, let's find 7 pi over 6. It's right here. So I know it's going to be cosine is the first coordinate. Cosine is the first coordinate and sine is the second. So I know my answer is going to be -1/2. Perfect. Okay, let's find tangent of pi over 4. Okay, well that's going to be this coordinate right here. And we know that tangent is sine over cosine. So that means I'm going to do √2 over 2 divided by √2 over 2. Well, what is that? Well, they're the same number, so when we divide them, we get 1. All right, next up is cosine of 0. Cosine of 0 comes from here, and we're going to look at our first coordinate, right? Because our first coordinate is cosine. So that's going to be 1. Let's take a look at tangent of 3 pi over 2. So that's coming from right here. So I'm going to do sine, which is -1, divided by 0. What is -1 divided by 0? That is the cannot divide by 0 police saying you cannot do that. So here we are saying that this is undefined. All right, cosine of 3 pi over 4. Where are we at? 3 pi over 4. We are located right here. Okay, cosine of 3 pi over 4 is going to be my first coordinate. Cosine, first coordinate, remember that, is a -√2 over 2. All right, sine of 3 pi over 2. We're going to find that 3 pi over 2 located right here. And that's going to be our second coordinate, is going to be -1. Let's try another one just for kicks. Let's go tangent of 3 pi over 4. A little trickier than our previous tan problem. So going to that, we've got a sine, which would be the first coordinate, divided by this. Well, we're still going to get a 1, right, because the numbers are exactly the same, but it's going to be a positive divided by a negative. So we are going to get a -1 here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for video 3. Don't forget to do your assignment for this particular video. I hope you have a fantastic day, and if you have a cat, please make sure you go and pet that cat. Thanks so much.